Hi, this is Barry, and welcome to the Simplicity Zen podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you could take a moment and click the subscribe button and alert, and also like the video, that would help. And the way that helps is YouTube uses those metrics in determining how widely to distribute these podcasts. And plus, I guess there's the benefit of you can actually get alerted when there's new episodes if you're into it. If you're watching this on the many podcast streams that this is sent out to, you can go to simplicityzen.com and there's a way to sign up for the newsletter there. Today, my guest is Valerie Forstman. She's an Associate Zen Master of the Sanbo Zen lineage and is the guiding teacher at Mountain Cloud Zen Center. Her first teacher, with whom she continues to work, is Ruben Habito Roshi. Since 2003, she's also trained under the guidance of Yamada Ryoun Roshi, currently the abbot of Sanbo Zen. She has a master's degree of theological studies and a PhD in biblical interpretation. She recently retired from her work as Associate Dean for Admissions and Common Life at the Bright Divinity School in Fort Worth, Texas. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Barry. Nice to be here.
Thank you. So, being that you went from a divinity school, are you also a Christian?
I did grow up, absolutely, in a progressive Protestant tradition. My father was a theologian.
Mhm.
He taught at Stanford when I was a young child growing up there in Palo Alto. And then he made the move to Vanderbilt Divinity School so that he could work with PhD students as well as Master of Divinity students. So I grew up in that milieu when I was young. My family went to church. When I went off to college, I was, as often happens, I think I just explored the world and let that go. I was an undergraduate student at Oberlin. I was a very serious classical musician.
Mhm.
First career, that's really what I
What
did.
what instrument?
Flute and piccolo. Um,
Is flautist the right way to say it?
it's considered archaic, so it's not incorrect, but that's the second pronunciation in the dictionary. So
Okay.
flutist, flute player, flautist is formal.
I wanted to sound fancy, and
Yeah, and so I went off to Oberlin. It's very high powered, wonderful but high pressure um, conservatory of music. It's also an excellent college, liberal arts college, and that was why I chose that as the place I wanted to go, because I really wanted to continue to explore um, sort of these deepest questions: religion, religious traditions, philosophy, literature, alongside getting my main degree from the Conservatory of Music, and then hoping to go on and as a performer.
yeah.
Um,
My own entrance into spirituality was 100% through music. In a weird sort of way. Like as a kid, I mean, music just completely, entranced me. I guess that's just normal for being human. Oh, maybe not, 'cause one of my daughters could care less about music, uh, it was, the music of the Grateful Dead and kind of the ritual experience of their concerts. I, I'd say 99.99% chance I would not have had a spiritual path. Certainly wouldn't have been Zen Buddhism had I not experienced that. I mean, like that music just cracked me open, And I'm curious, did you find music spiritual at all in your own experience?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The flute was like this lightning rod, between heaven and earth, so to speak. And the experience of playing with its joy and freedom and its struggle. For me, that experience of playing and at the same time watching,
Hmm.
judging
Hmm.
oneself, that sort of two-track experience um, was part of what drove me to find a practice and ultimately drove me to Zen. And I
Hmm.
think helped me recognize it the moment I found my way to a Zen center. This is for me. That really all came out of
Hmm.
the experience of making music. Yeah.
Improvisational music seems to be very kind of conducive to kind of like a a natural samadhi. Would you say it's the same for like a more structured classical music?
Yeah, I am definitely a classically trained musician. And yes, absolutely, those experiences, they're sometimes called flow, but just that total absorption that can come in a moment where that separation, that sense of divide just dissolves, falls away. And there's just this sound, in a sense, no one doing anything, just this sound. Beautiful experience of samadhi.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, obviously before you had probably a vocabulary or philosophical framework to understand what those experiences were, I imagine.
Right. Absolutely.
Did you see him in terms of like kind of Judeo-Christian theology at all? Like this is the Holy Spirit or anything like that?
Oh, not so much analytically, uh, but I would say for me, I mean, of course, spiritus, the ruach, this breath, and flute playing, above all the instruments, there it takes more air to play a flute because quite a bit of the air that you blow doesn't actually go into the instrument. It's that blowing against the wall of this embouchure hole, the head joint, and that splits the air and that causes it to start vibrating. So you spend a lot of time learning how to breathe and practicing just breathing.
Is it
But
abdominal breathing?
yeah, sure. I mean, different teachers teach it in different ways. Really, I studied with voice teachers, or just breathing teachers. And we had all these wonderful gadgets to sort of learn how to freely breathe. And it's odd because you think that what could be more natural,
Hmm.
but to really harness that in a way that supports this instrument. And you asked about the Judeo-Christian tradition. For me, um, just this experience of playing itself had a depth to it, a spirituality to it. But alongside it, I just grew up asking questions.
Hmm.
Maybe it was my nature, maybe it was that the house would be full of grad students from time to time who were asking questions. Um, and so we really planted deep to pursue, what is this life ultimately?
Hmm.
What is it to be human? Who
Hmm.
am I? What's of ultimate value?
Hmm.
And, you know, what is this God
Hmm.
that the tradition I grew up was, sort of imagining, fathoming it through these scriptures, but also through relationships, through social justice, um, that kind of ultimate meaning making. All of the, for a young person, I carried those questions, and they came to me, I think, because of my context and family, very much focused around unconditional love.
Hmm.
And I was raised, fortunately, in a family that there was no proselytizing. Wow, not at all. But there was this sense of unconditional love, and even talking about it. And yet, part of for me, I think, is for many of us, you hear about this beautiful idea, and you think, yeah, that's great, but not for me. You know, we
What was
we have
what
that
was the oh, sorry.
just that sense of lack or that gap,
Hmm.
which can be so very helpful even for all of its pain.
Hmm. Oh, what was the denomination
My
in which?
father and I actually am ordained in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. So it's a small, progressive Protestant denomination, primarily located in the United States and Canada.
Is that similar in vibe and activity to like the Universal Universalists or whatever it's called? Where
Um,
it's
there's I feel very at home, very resonant. I have some great UU friends who are also Zen teachers. There's such a natural kind of segue or resonance between UU, Universal Unitarianism and um, Buddhism, Zen, these practices, um, maybe more congruent. This Christian Church Disciples of Christ, it's in communion with Church of the um, Churches of Christ. No, that's United Church of Christ. There's a big difference. Church of Christ, United Church of Christ, even Episcopalian. Um, so there's sort of a sense of communion. For my ordination, had I wanted to go and have that little extra training, would have been recognized in the United Church of Christ or the Episcopal Church.
So I'm curious, how central was Jesus to the language used and the imagery and the way of communicating versus more like generally God in the both what you heard your parents talking about and what you heard in church, even how you conceptualize things. Like, was it Jesus centric or more like God centric, or is that a dumb question?
I know it's a fair question. It's kind of varied even from congregation to congregation. And in my experience, I had a better sense of this body of Christ. So it wasn't so much for me a personal relationship with this figure Jesus, of great admiration, appreciation, and it went beyond that. But the body of Christ, which so I would say maybe in terms of the way you're framing it, more God centered.
Hmm. As a kid, did you have what could be termed like intuitive or mystical experiences? Did you have any direct feeling of like greater power or Holy Spirit or anything like that? Or is it more like this is what I believe and there's some emotional
Oh,
resonance?
I remember, sitting on my bed as a very young child in the dark,
Mhm.
calling on, show yourself, like, and fully believing, like Moses, before the burning bush,
Mhm.
this holy ground. I absolutely thought that. And then, why is this such a mystery? But I would say my own clearest experience as a young person was actually more of a Zen experience that took me completely by surprise, that was not framed in Christological or even Christian terms. Just sitting in a classroom, I know a number of people now on this Zen path who have had those turning moments. And for me, I was 16, looking out the window, second floor in a history class. You remember exactly where you are when this happens. And all of a sudden, just that whole vista was one empty infinite, it just disappeared. And this profound sense of one, which I had no context for,
Mhm.
kind of came rushing in. And for a couple of days, I was walking around in a state of wonder and
Mhm.
bliss.
It's interesting how you and your partner, your teaching partner Henry Sheckman, both have these kind of unexpected, unbidden
Yeah,
Kensho-ish type experiences when they're
yeah.
younger.
And you never forget, but when such an experience, and I think that they are not so uncommon,
Mhm.
but we don't, if you have no context, I had absolutely no way to make sense of that or to integrate it.
And,
Uh,
and it didn't even cross your mind that there'd be any Judeo-Christian connection at all.
it didn't cross my mind to logically try to figure that out. It just went beyond any kind of frame
Mhm.
like that at
Mhm.
all.
Did you kind of have any sort of rough landing from that at all, or was it kind of easily passed by for you?
Ah, well, yeah, and it wasn't the rough landing of, I know Henry so well. I know his story. It wasn't quite like that. I you know, I did have to navigate um, the sort of challenge of getting through high school, that last bit of high school into college, which was, had its own challenges and left me kind of surprised that I
Mhm,
wasn't more at home in a world of love,
mhm,
that there was a sense of brokenness that I brought into that. And um, I suppose after that experience, that was um, odd. There was a sense, a bit of estrangement from one's own experience that
mhm,
took a while
mhm,
to, to see and see through, and then you know let it invite me into a practice that could just allow all of that to open up beyond my wildest dreams.
mhm. So you went to college. You knew right away you wanted to be a musician.
Yeah, I was a double major, religion and music, but when it came time to choose, no question, I had to give it a try.
Mhm. And during your college years, did you go through any sort of like party phase or even psychedelics or anything like that?
No, Oberlin, uh, it may have had some of that, but as a performance major, also taking classes in the college, I think one time in my senior year, I went to a movie.
Okay.
Um, you couldn't get alcohol in the little town Oberlin, so that was not an issue. I think 3.2 beer, which tastes terrible. I was just working
Mhm,
and hard and very serious. Um, and I sort of at the end, I felt I had to take a year off before going to grad school for my master's in music, just to regain my sense of humor.
mhm,
Though I was real grateful for what I received, it was an intense place. That they had the highest suicide rate of any college in the country during the 4 years that I was there.
my
Um,
goodness.
and I think that Oberlin is not like that for everybody, and it's also kind of gotten a little healthier. It's my impression of the school.
Seems almost like kind of Japanese monastic in a way.
Oh yeah, it was a very monastic, you know,
Yeah.
fantastic resources, but I was the first person in line for breakfast, and then I would just live in the practice room,
Mhm.
except for going to class, until I couldn't do it anymore at night. I'd go to bed.
Wow.
Uh,
Did you continue to go to religious services through that period of your life?
every now and then, mostly for a sense of community,
Mhm,
I would visit. There was a kind of United Church of Christ there on the little square. It's very famous, Tappan Square in Oberlin. And I took a course, an ad hoc course in Zen Buddhism. Um,
okay.
and uh, that was really my first taste of sitting.
Mhm,
It was only a 1 month January term course. Um, and at the time, something didn't quite, there was this slight friction. Like, I don't know how to make all these pieces fit together.
mhm,
Even though my own religious sensibility was very free and
mhm,
open, it's still, it was like, oh, what do you do with this? And so I enjoyed the class, but it was much later that I found my way
mhm.
home.
Yeah. So when you were in that class, did you have any callback to that experience you had when you were in your classroom? Was there any sort of did you draw those lines at all?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Probably have to say no.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
But just trying to learn like anybody would with our monkey minds
Yeah.
to sit still
Um,
for 25 minutes and stare at the wall. And what a challenge.
so what did you do during your year off?
I went to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and lived there with a family and took lessons and taught, did some performing. Um, I was quite inspired to become a flutist by my mother had a cousin that I really have a deep resonance and affection for. And she lived there, played principal flute in the orchestra. And so I studied with her regularly for that year and prepared, and also spent some time alone. Uh, just yeah, it was a deepening year and a year of sort of preparation, and then I applied to grad school and went on.
Did you have a favorite composer?
A favorite composer, Bach,
Yeah.
Mozart, and Mahler.
Mhm. If you had to pick one?
If I had to live alone, probably now it would be Bach.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, that's a difficult question because it's, when you're hearing Mozart, it's so sublime, and we think there's nothing else. And sitting in an orchestra playing a Mahler symphony, it's utterly fulfilling, utterly complete, and talk about spirituality and music.
Mhm.
But still, it would probably be Bach for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know as much as I should about Mueller. I need to look into that. Um, yeah. So, do you do composition or is it all performance?
Performance for me, yeah. I admire so much people who compose, and of course had friends who are doing that. But yeah, just playing. And chamber music and orchestral especially were real draw.
Mhm. Did you um, did you ever listen to any popular music like jazz or rock or folk or?
Oh yeah, I grew up in the 60s and 70s listening to, of course, the Beatles and Judy Collins and Joni Mitchell and Paul Simon and Garfunkel then, and the whole Grateful Dead. That stuff is classic, and it was even then, and it was part of kind of weaving the fabric of our identity as young people in the world. It was also part of my sense of social justice. Uh, really got woven together, kind of knit together in a lot of that music.
How about Jethro Tull with the flute?
Yeah, the only time I ever went to a live rock concert was Jethro Tull.
Really?
Yeah, it's just a little too loud, if
Yeah.
you're
I was surprised. I went to a Jethro concert and I was expecting it to be a little more folk-like. I was really surprised how hard rock it was.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So, did in your kind of graduate, yeah, masters in music. Am I saying that right? Masters in music. Was there any kind of life experiences pertaining to spirituality or Zen or anything there, or was it where pretty much we just focused on the studies itself?
Yeah, that was a period for me of really just focusing on honing my skills and becoming a professional. Um, and I've, got a first job. I had some wonderful opportunities, apprenticed for a year with the principal flutist of the Toronto Symphony. So I lived in Canada. And then I got this job at a small college in Indiana. And from there, got married, moved to Dallas, and became a very active freelancer. And then, won these various auditions to play principal flute in a chamber orchestra, the Bach Society, the Dallas Opera for a year. And I eventually became the first call extra with the Dallas Symphony. So got to tour Europe and go to Napa Valley every summer for their, and then Vail. It was a great life. And yet along the way, um, I was preparing for an audition.
Hmm.
This is where for me, the path really got focused. Um, and it was for a position that I had played and was automatically put in the finals and cared about deeply. I thought, this notion of wanting to do this work, but also having an identity in this place. And every day I was in training, and the whole day was spent toward this so that I could play a certain way at a time in the future. And during that period, I was waking up in the night kind of being revisited by, what I perceived as past, maybe you could say failures or disappointments. And, you know, this is going on, and it's like the past and the future are like these tectonic plates that are just sliding apart. And where the present moment would be, there was just a chasm. And I was losing my love for playing.
Mhm.
And the week before that audition, I subbed with the Dallas Symphony, as I often did. And a good friend said, "How are you?" And I said to him, something has to give. And I
Mhm.
briefly said this, and, "Oh, I've got just the thing. Come and sit." And 6 months before that, he had discovered the Maria Cannon Zen Center in
Okay.
Dallas with Ruben Habito Roshi.
Mhm.
And so the audition was on a Saturday, and Monday night they had an orientation at the Zen Center, and I was there, and I never left. It was immediate. Just
Jeez.
huge relief, being home,
Mhm.
um, beyond any logic, beyond how do I figure this out? How do I fit this together? It was just, this is it.
Mhm.
That was actually 1994.
Mhm.
And just amazing experience. I did the introduction. I was quickly ushered in to meet Ruben,
Mhm.
actually before receiving that last introductory talk where they tell you what to expect when you meet the teacher. And so I went in, I bowed to him, I said my name, "What brings you here?" And you're supposed to have a sense of these four primary motivations. I didn't know that. What leapt out of my mouth was, "I want to be my true self."
Mhm.
And that was absolutely true.
Had you done any Zen? Well, I guess you'd taken that Zen class, so you
Yeah,
knew a little
but
bit
there
about
was that long fallow period, of, well, I mean, finding this or that community of faith, but long fallow period, and just suddenly this was so clear.
Mhm.
And he gave me the koan mu that day.
Hmm. And would you say, Rinzai talks about great doubt. Would you say your great doubt was mostly, who am I? Why am I here? Type of, would you say it was that kind of flavor? Because different people seem to have different kind of
Yeah,
flavors of great, even if they don't think of it in those terms. There's always some kind of driving
yeah,
force that gets people
yeah,
in the crowd.
those fundamental questions. For me, it might have also been even more intimately framed in this. Sure, who am I? But what is this
Mhm.
true self? But also this experience of unconditional love
Mhm.
that was somehow separate from me.
Mhm.
Was really, I would say, great doubt.
Mhm. Did you tell him about your experience in the classroom?
At some point, that
Yeah.
came up, just recognize once you begin, then it's apparent. Oh, that's what happened.
Mhm.
But
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with Mu? Did you dive in? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were going to
I
say
just
something.
was going to say, there's nothing to get back to. You
Yeah.
know, it's not something in the past that we recovered. Not at all. No need.
Um, so did you dive into Mu pretty deeply right away?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was when I had read just enough.
Mhm.
3 Pillars of Zen, a couple of Zen books at that point to have a sense that what I was offered was this great treasure or this sharpest sword.
Mhm.
And the first week that I had Mu, I would say every waking moment, uh, you know, somehow Mu was around, or I was asking myself, what is Mu?
Mhm.
What is Mu? And I don't actually recommend that now, but I remember a weekend sitting, driving home from a rehearsal, and I'm sitting at a stoplight. What is Mu? And I realized I was giving myself a terrible headache,
What do you not recommend specifically?
figuring it out, just what is this? And I stopped it at that point, and the headache went away. And then I started just,
Mhm.
and, Mu would come in. And I like this invitation to, for me at least, to let Mu do whatever needs doing. So
Mhm.
there's this ease that comes, and it's just everywhere you turn, moo. And then in this sample sitting, you're just mooing. You're just mooing. Um, so when I say I don't recommend it, I don't recommend applying logic, trying to work the question or work even the monk's question. But even to take up what is moo, I would just, you know, be with moo, let yourself, in a sense, become moo. Really, this intimacy and simplicity where anything else just sort of gradually dissolves away. And then, it will show itself in some unguarded moment in a way that, as you said, unbidden, that we can't anticipate. It's so helpful not to think of this as something you're going to go get, because that just works against it.
Right. Did did you did you attend a lot? Did they do sesshin? Do you guys pronounce it? Some people pronounce sesshin. I never know.
We say session. Session. Ruben spent 18 years in Japan, so he's very
So
fluent.
so we always said sesshin when I was kind of growing up, but I
Yeah,
had a Japanese person tell me no, the correct pronunciation is sesshin.
yeah. Either is fine. I say session.
Yeah.
Um, and yes, that's a vital part of this practice. And I so I started in May, and in October was the first session, and I signed up, eagerly. And fortunately, we had the community had rented a place that was about an hour and a half out of town.
Mhm.
Nothing fancy, but a place we could turn into a zendo and rooms, sort of dorm rooms for sleeping. And I
Mhm.
showed up for this session, and the schedule is posted on the wall. I don't know what happened, why I somehow didn't realize, oh, there are like 8.5 hours a day of sitting. You
Mhm.
know, I knew it'd all be in silence and there'd be some samu. Or, you know, I looked at the schedule. I thought, I can't do that. And then, but I was there. It was too far to turn around and go back. And as it happened, we were assigned seats in this long, sort of rectangular cinder block room that was our zendo. And these two seasoned sitters, they happened to be two tall men, were sitting on either side of me like pillars.
Mhm.
And it was so helpful. My own sitting might sag and they would just be absolutely still sitting there. It's kind of like being held by
Mhm.
that. And along about the third day in, I think it was, um, maybe the fourth day, I'm sitting in the afternoon and suddenly am visited by this experience.
Mhm. So
And
you flew on your first session?
yeah,
Right. Mhm.
yeah, it came, of course, considerably deepened over the years since then, other experiences, but
Mhm.
absolutely clear.
Mhm.
Open.
It how would what would you say the wisdom was? Like, I think describing the experience becomes a little bit like kind of almost like porn, but as far as the wisdom, yeah. Well, like, what
Yeah,
wisdom did you kind of take away from it? Yeah,
it's yeah, it can be like voyeurism and not so helpful.
yeah.
Uh,
And I
it's
think part of the problem is people think like, oh, I have to have that experience.
That's the problem,
Yeah.
actually, and it's not. It becomes so fresh and fitting to each person in a way we could not anticipate. But I would say, so this experience on the cushion happened that, was riveting, and then went away, and the bell rang, clappers, we started walking Kin in, and I started just walking, and there was a little altar near the front with a photograph of Yamada Ryoun Roshi on it, and
Mhm.
Ruben's teacher. And I had seen that photograph every time I sat and had great respect for this teacher, but I couldn't see anything in his face. It was kind of inscrutable to me. It's someone I hadn't known,
Mhm.
and this day we're walking by, and as I passed that altar, you're not looking around, but my eye just happened to fall on that photograph. And all of a sudden, the compassion was just pouring out of his face.
Mhm.
And I understood why.
Um, so was there any sort of like a thought or event that kind of like triggered it, or did it just kind of plop out of nowhere?
When I was sitting, there was a sense of a vision. There's a riveted vision, and the
Mhm.
words came, just fell on me. This is my body.
Mhm.
And I was not trying to do anything with that. It was just utterly riveting
Mhm.
and utterly true.
Mhm.
This. And, you know, I just sat there for a moment transfixed in that. And then from this old past, came this thought, that's blasphemy.
Mhm.
And of course, it all went away. But that's when the bell rang and stood up and started walking. And it was just, it's
What was,
completion.
what was your first Dokusan like after that experience?
So I went to the line. There were, because it was there were 5 seats, fortunately. And I was sitting on the 5th one in front of the door and just silently weeping. I wasn't sitting there saying, I've got this, I've seen this. I was just beyond thinking, beyond words. I was just sitting. And by the time I got right in front of the door, my lap was wet.
Mhm.
And, bell rang. I went in, I did my bows, sat in front of Ruben, and he took one look at me and said, what's happening? And my first response was nothing. And then all of a sudden, this all came. And I just told it to him.
Mhm.
And at that point, he said, what is love? And there was just no problem.
Mhm.
All those checking questions, just at play,
Mhm.
at home.
Mhm. So Henry Schuckman in his book, he kind of describes like a series of Kensho experiences, and then describe what he felt like was kind of a, yeah, I mean, some people call it the Great Death, kind of a culminating, um, kind of final awakening. Do you think does that schema have to apply to everyone, or do you think someone can kind of have like a crack open with a initial Kensho, and then it could be more gradual, or do you think there needs to be like a final culminating awakening?
I think that we have that crack open is a good way to say it. And then, in my tradition, the koans
Mhm.
just continue on this path to help clarify that, open it like this lens that opens and it keeps opening. And along the way, there are, in my experience, very clear Kensho experiences. So,
Mhm.
where you could say exactly where you are, exactly what happens, and they're fresh and different and deeper. Um, and, you know, I think for many people, this sense of great enlightenment where it's just all gone
Mhm.
does happen. I mean, I don't know many, but that does happen.
Mhm.
And at the same time, well, there's something fundamentally put to rest.
Mhm.
You never stop. It's so. Uh, I just was working on a koan with Eka, Huika, this successor to Bodhidharma, where he has his great awakening with Bodhidharma. They're out walking in the mountains, and Eka's response, you know, all relations have come to an end for me.
Mhm.
First thing he says. There's a sense of end. But Bodhidharma says, does that mean it's become extinct? No, it's not extinct. And Dharma says, prove it. What proof is there for it? And Eka says, I'm always seeing it so clearly. I'm always clearly aware. I mean, it's this one fabric that's just this arising right here. And with that, the invitation to never ending practice.
What do you think the relationship he and awakening is, both pre and post cracking open, so to speak?
Samadhi comes in different flavors. You can read about it. There's a kind of, you know, there's some formulas around different aspects or types of samadhi, but basically this great sense of balance, absorption, bliss, ease, nobody doing anything, just sitting. It's so restorative.
Mhm.
The Dharma gate of ease and bliss, I think, is Dogen's, you know, ease and joy is samadhi. But that's, there's a distinction between that and these awakening experiences, which are very particular and sudden, even as they may happen, again and again. Joshu said to have had 18 really deep enlightenment experiences and countless other small ones. And, that's a sudden incoming, you could say, how to put it, but a real shift uh, in Ruben once said it changes all the furnishings in the world. Everything is just rearranged. Um,
Yeah.
so
Oh, sorry. Oh, if I could pontificate a little bit, I think, so you and Henry, you both have these kind of spontaneous awakening experiences, and other people do, but I feel like without the samadhi kind of engine, I feel like they just become experiences. I kind of feel like samadhi. I don't know how to articulate this. To be I'm realizing now as I'm
I
trying to.
think now you're talking about this ongoing practice that really integrates these
Mhm.
openings.
Yeah.
Uh, we're soaked in it, we're immersed, and samadhi is like watering that garden almost. I don't know what metaphor to use, but yeah, this ongoing practice. And it's not all samadhi. It's also just sitting,
Mhm.
coming back to this here and now. And then it gets, it clears up, the sky clears, and there's your samadhi.
Mhm.
Uh, and over time, I think the way gets clearer and clearer. So it's both gradual and sudden. You pointed to that earlier.
So I know in your tradition, you guys have about 30 miscellaneous koans. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Yeah. And so after going through those and kind of switching to the gateless gate and Blue Cliff record, did, did that seem just like a smooth transition to you, or do you feel like the different phases, like the miscellaneous, gateless gate, Blue Cliff, do you feel like the nature of your Dokusan koan experience changed, or did it kind of seem like a seamless whole to you? Does that question make
Uh,
sense?
yeah, for me personally, it was just this unfolding path with great joy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the miscellaneous koans in the Sanbo Zen collection end with this what is the sharpest sword?
Mm-hmm.
Each branch of the coral reflects the moon, um, is one translation. And that comes up again as number 100 in the Blue Cliff Record or Hekigan Roku. And of course, you don't know that when you're going through, but there's this beautiful sort of kind of ending that opens up and you get launched into the Gateless Gate or Mumon Khan, which is just, there's so much gratitude and wonder that goes with this, but it seems incredibly natural to go from the miscellaneous then, to that just that next step into the Mumonkan, full circle back to Mu, starting with Mu. And then you come to this amazing end, case 48 of the Mumonkan. Um, Mumon talks about in his verse this, progress we make step by step, but you have to realize no matter what, there's still the unsurpassable whole, HOLE. It's inviting us on, of course, right here, but also this endless practice. And then there's this privilege of opening up the Hekigan Roku or the Blue Cliff Record, and vast and void, Bodhidharma, there he is. It's amazing how, Mumon said, I didn't put the koans in any particular order, but I think the ancestors must have done it then. And, this beauty of this Hekigan Roku or Blue Cliff Record, starting with Bodhidharma and ending with the sharpest sword. And then, to the Shobogenzo, which has a different Shoyoroku, Book of Equanimity, different flavor. Traditionally, we would say the Blue Cliff Record is from the Rinzai tradition and the Shoyoroku from the Soto. So there's a quality to it. And it just seems so natural to keep going.
Do you guys do transmission of light and 5 ranks in your tradition as well?
Yes,
Yeah.
we do.
And then end with the precepts?
Yes. Yeah.
And I was asked a question. What was it? Oh, yeah. So it seems like you had a pretty, you described like kind of the unfolding of the koan process, in very positive terms. Did you ever have what some people might call like kind of a dark night of the soul period or anything like that?
Of course. I never had a dark night of the soul where I thought, get me out of here, or this is too much, or I don't want to do this, or where I doubted the koans. That never happened. But I had these horrible, wonderful moments of being stuck. And I could say they were very important. Not always. Sometimes you just get stuck and finally you get through it and something clears up and you go on. But a number of moments for me where there was a real turn came out of getting stuck, and something just falls away. And it can be quite profound. And the koans, this, when every now and then it seems like a gate or a wall thrown up there, and you sit with that, or maybe what can often happen is you're meeting your teacher and Doksan, go sit with this. It doesn't come, and you can bow and get up and go back to the Zendo, sit down, and bam, it just falls on you. Sometimes not. I've had, especially later in my study, I've been through now the koans, all of them 3 times. And they're always different, richer, deeper, new aspect to see. And as I do these with Ryoun Roshi, I still see Ruben from time to time, but primarily now it's Ryoun Roshi, and his own experience is always deepening. And so he brings us these koans and wants us to see this new way that he's seen it. He wants to share his world. And in that case, I've had a number of doksans on one koan.
Does he expect different presentations than your previous teachers?
Yeah. Or maybe I've done the koan with him in the past to his satisfaction, but now something new.
Yeah. He's just wanting you to dive a little deeper or see it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. So could you tell me a little bit about your teachers? So, I've seen videos of Ryoun Roshi, but not Habito. Could you kind of like paint a picture of what he's like as a person and a teacher and so forth?
Heart of compassion is the first. He very, very wise, a brilliant man, scholar, fluent in a number of languages, absolutely unpretentious, absolutely unassuming, and yet very present. To sit in the room with him is quite strong, as with Ryoun Roshi.
Mhm.
And there's this a quality with Ruben, also just this compassion. When I'm sitting with him, there's a sense of goneness that
Mhm.
is clear with, I think, many people I've sat with. Very, very clear, like a lake of goneness. But with Ruben, it's also this love,
Mhm.
it's boundless love. And in fact, years ago, um, the co-abbot of Great Bow Monastery, Hogan Bays,
Mhm.
um, made a translation of the Kanzeon Sutra. When I started at Maria Kenan, we always chanted the Kanzeon Sutra in Japanese, and I loved that.
Mhm.
Didn't have to know what it meant, just this sounding. And then we went to chanting it in English, which I could understand. There's also value in that. And then Hogan Bays made this translation that he called boundless compassion.
Mhm.
And Ruben was just drawn to that. And they, every time they sit, they chant boundless compassion. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, just compassion. Thus the pure heart always rejoices. In the light, recall this. In the dark, recall this. Moment after moment, the true heart arises.
Mhm.
Time after time, there is nothing but this. That, that is so near to the heart of Ruben's teaching. He's written many books. He's a teacher of world religions, a scholar, um, still teaching at Perkins Theological School in Dallas, world religions. He's was a Jesuit,
Mhm.
grew up Catholic, Philippines,
Mhm.
became a Jesuit, was going to be a physicist.
Mhm.
Brilliant, brilliant mind. And one day he was sitting in a classroom in this prestigious scholarship program,
Mhm.
physics at college, and just started it. And his gaze just went out the window, and he realized, if I follow that gaze all the way, it's going to come back to me. And something like that. I mean, physics, and it was a turning moment for him. And he decided to become a Jesuit. So for 18 years, they sent him to Japan. He taught at Sophia University. And his advisor in the Jesuits told him, you have to meet Yamada Ryoun Roshi.
Mhm.
That's how Ruben found Zen.
Mhm. Interesting. I'm curious. So there's a lot of Jesuits and other Christians who do, Sanbo Zen. I'm curious how they reconcile the differing, and maybe you're not a spokesperson for this, but how they reconcile the differing kind of cosmological views of the universe between Buddhism and Catholicism, or is it just whatever? Let's not even think about it, type of thing.
Well, I don't think the cosmologies are an issue, the folks I know, but I've heard Ruben be interviewed on that question many times, and uh, there's just not a conflict. He'll say, I'm fully Christian, fully Buddhist. Um, that you know, he's not living in a world of constructs. It's this world, this reality, this boundless heart, and it expresses itself for him in this way, and in this way. Kon Roshi is one of the reasons, Yamada Kon Roshi, that there are all these Western Christians who found their way to Sanbo Zen, because he was so open. He said, Zen will make you a better Christian or Muslim or Jew. It was really about this practice and clarifying, what is it to be human? Who really are you? And when you see that, then you have the freedom to live your life in compassion. And
Did his dad or Yasutani also have outreach to um, Jesuit and Christian communities, or is it mostly
I,
Kwan?
I believe that began really with Kon Roshi.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about what Dokusan is like with him and contrast it with Habito? Is it a
With
difference
with
for you?
with Ryoun Roshi?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh, sorry. No,
Yamada
with him.
Ryoun Roshi, was Ruben's
I
teacher. He
misspoke.
died in 1989.
Yeah.
I sadly never met him, though I feel so near to him. In part, this first Kensho experience, but also just
Mhm.
he's just giving all the time. Yeah, we're inheriting this. We're right in the midst of it. His
Mhm.
world, his practice. But Ryoun Roshi, this has been an amazing opportunity. I started studying with him in 2003.
Mhm.
Ruben nominated me to go to the first Kenshukai when a new group was being formed. So Ruben's generation was ending their
Mhm.
study, and Ryoun Roshi decided to start this new group. And that very year, I had a chance to go with two other students and spend 2.5 weeks in Tokyo and sit with Ryoun Roshi every morning, every night. It was a time of just a great privilege, access, shared practice. And, you know, uh, Doksan is recognizable.
Mhm.
It's very recognizable. I did have very good training with Ruben. So often with Ryoun Roshi, we do the koan and go on to the next one. But his teaching, I'd leave the Doksan room and write a page of notes.
Mhm.
Uh, and then there would be times where no, he's looking for something. Go
Mhm.
and sit. Go and sit. And it could be in his way, his manner, or like, I do not accept. Fine. Whereas, Ruben might just say, well, I just sit with this one a little more. You know, it's it's just
Mhm.
yeah.
When you were sent, start working with them, was that explicitly that you're seen as a teacher candidate at that point?
All the people who are invited to Kenshukai, the hope is that you are on that path.
Mhm.
And so the first year I went in 2003, it's
Mhm.
a week of study, a week of seeing the Roshi and Doksan. Um,
Is it
uh,
actually a session?
it's a combination. You're sitting, you know, a lot of sitting and Doksan, and the day's divided up then with this study, koan study together.
Okay. Oh, so you do group koan study. Okay.
So everybody there has to have done all the koans at least once. And it's different. And in the beginning with our group, I think Roshi was a little uncomfortable. Is this really healthy? Is it really good? And since then, he's mellowed a lot. I mean, he's still absolutely there, so generous, very serious, at the same time enjoying, you know. But yeah, so 2003, I was made assistant teacher, which is the first step. And 2 years later, we had the Kinshkai in China at Joshu's temple. 2005, I was uh, made a teacher, which is the next step. And
Is that the step you're at now, or is there further?
no, then 2017, I was made an Associate Zen Master of Roshi.
Yeah, okay. And then there's senior or no,
There's
authentic.
what's it called?
They call it authentic.
Full
Yeah.
Roshi. Yeah, there is another step. Henry just did the ceremony at this. There were 4 people who received full Dharma transmission at our
Have you
Kinshuk.
have either you or Henry ever done koans with each other? Like, or have you always kind of been peers, if that makes sense?
We've been
Like, has
peers.
he gone to Dokusan with you, or have you gone to Dokusan with him, or
We have done that,
Uh-huh.
and I can't recall if it's been around a specific koan or maybe just more around practice.
Mhm.
But he has come to a session that I was leading in Germany. He led one there right before, and he stayed on. And in that context, came to Doksan, but really talking about his life and practice. And it's so face to face.
Mhm.
It's he's an amazing, absolutely amazing colleague and companion, Dharma brother, and I learn from him all the time.
I've noticed at Mountain Cloud, he's characterized as spiritual director, whereas you're guiding teacher. What is actually the distinction there?
Yeah. Part of that, I mean, of course, Henry has been here, given his life to this place
Mhm,
before COVID.
mhm,
It was 11 years of
mhm,
in-person, full on being here all the time,
mhm,
um, regular talks, Doksan all the time, intro classes. He just gave himself to this.
mhm,
And then, of course, COVID came, but also in that time period along the way, Henry had sadly a bike accident and a neurological injury, just hit his head, had a concussion that turned out to be more serious than he thought at the beginning.
mhm,
So in true Henry fashion, he just plowed on, very busy,
mhm,
and has come to realize that he can't do that. And particularly triggering for these symptoms for him is the screen.
mhm,
So he really is limited in being able to do Doksan. Even face to face, that kind of quick activity makes him very, very dizzy.
mhm,
So part of this adjustment is recognizing his leadership over this whole organization.
mhm,
He's developed now original love. He's doing this teaching,
mhm,
but he's doing very little Doksan.
mhm,
And when we have on-site events, session, it's difficult for him. So he's, you know, more and more likely I'll be the one who's here and he'll be online. We did that with our last session.
mhm,
So I've been invited in to be guiding teacher, which means many hours of Doksan every week and joining Henry together in uh, programming, uh, brainstorming and decisions,
mhm,
uh, and sharing these talks, um, kind of sharing the vision of Mountain Cloud. Uh, but obviously, for me, always with um, great appreciation and I would say deference.
mhm,
Right? But it's so eye to eye that it doesn't,
mhm,
there's no struggle in that.
mhm. Due to Henry's challenges due to Dokusan, have you taken on any of the students,
Yeah.
class students?
So this was an agreement we came to early on,
Mhm,
a little unusual, but because our training is so side by side all these years,
mhm,
um, and we've heard each other give all these talks, he knows me really well. We just are comfortable with students going back and forth between us.
mhm,
And he's actually recommended to his students who want to continue co-on study that they come to me. So I have taken many students that were seeing Henry
mhm,
um, with the understanding that they're free to see him when that becomes possible.
mhm,
So that there's a kind of sharing going on that isn't so traditional, but works very well here.
mhm. That's great. Um, so you so you were working as a performer, a musical performer. You discovered Zen. At some point, did you? And then you went to on to theological school. What?
Yeah,
Can you talk a little bit about that transition there?
yeah, Barry. I was, you know, had that first Kensho experience. Continued sitting, working on koans, and one day out of the blue, I just got up off my cushion and heard myself say out loud, "I think I'll go back to school." It was
Mhm,
almost like, really? You know?
mhm,
And and I realized that so much of the language I had grown up with, um, it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me.
mhm,
This language of uh, total falling away of a separate self, this one body of Christ, that resonated with my experience in Zen. It
mhm,
didn't matter to me what you called it so much, but I felt like, wow, Christians need this practice. I in the Protestant traditions, I know they are really can be very good on social justice, on community, on questions of theology, um, but not so much in practice,
mhm,
having a dedicated practice.
Hmm.
So I just thought, hey, I'll go back to school. I'll get a master's of theological studies. I'll swim in that water. I'll get this language. You know, I'll be in a position where I can really offer this practice to people who are seeing the world through that lens.
Hmm.
And so I did,
Hmm.
and all the while continued to perform. That was fitting pieces together. And then, as the program I was in neared like its last semester, um, that school began a PhD program. It had been in the works for 10 years.
Hmm.
And I was invited, you know, here's the open door. Would you like to keep going? And
Hmm.
by then I had gotten really interested in actually biblical Hebrew,
Hmm.
the linguistic construction of meaning,
Hmm.
justice issues related to texts, these texts that can be wielded with so much power in our culture, and really wanting to read against the grain. Um, Feminist criticism is a big thing. Chaos theory and postmodernism, all of this was all kind of coming alive. And I thought, yeah, why not? So I don't recommend it to do a dissertation, to do a PhD just to do it. No,
Hmm.
you need, it's hard enough and should have a goal. How am I going to use this? But I didn't. I just walked through the door and kept going and completed it.
And this is while being a performer as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And were you ever a professor? Because you retired as a dean. Did you have a professor stuff through
I
that?
I taught uh, classes now and then in my role as associate dean. I am a doctor, but I was never a full professor. I was never on that track. I needed a position. I needed to find a job, and uh, right about the time I graduated with my PhD, um, I don't know, 6 weeks later, opened up this position at the school where I had earned that degree. And I just thought, oh, I could really do that. And it did turn out to be very meaningful work. It was, I was the confidential employee for that community of a very diverse community, people preparing for ministry, extremely diverse across all different denominations, progressive overwhelmingly.
Mostly progressive,
As we didn't have, you know,
not
um,
too Baptist.
yeah, yeah. There were some Alliance of Baptists. There's some strains of Baptist tradition that are open and inclusive, for example. And that's not the Southern Baptist Church, but we had those folks like that. A large LGBTQIA population in the school. And then there were also these PhD students. And I was the person that sort of counseled
Hmm.
to all of those students. Um, and that was quite meaningful work. Also, I was the face of the school for people who were looking to come and do
Hmm.
a divinity degree. So I interviewed every single applicant.
Hmm. Interesting. Um, the, so I'm curious, what does your husband think about all this? Does he practice or
Yeah,
at least
um,
supportive?
my my marriage of 20 plus years did end
Oh,
as I
okay,
found my way deeper and deeper into Zen and into theology.
I see.
Um, and out of it ended, that's always very sad, but remarkably healthy way of doing it. We still know one another. I never said anything I wish I hadn't. It was a real grace to
Did you
do.
guys have any kids together?
No,
Okay.
no, I could not. So we didn't have children. And, when it ended, I was really fine and kind of excited about being alone. Uh, it's kind of my nature. I had this new job.
Mhm.
Um, but some months into that, I guess it was about 6 months later, um, this lovely man at the Zen Center with whom I'd been sitting for some years, but didn't really know him.
Mhm.
You just sit facing the wall and say hi and go home. I did. I was busy,
Mhm.
and he reached out uh, to me and we gradually got to know each other, and we've been partners now for about 15 years. And he's a assistant teacher of Sanbo Zen now, and
Oh, I didn't know.
very dedicated.
What is his name? I'm sorry.
Scott Thornton.
Scott Thornton.
Yeah, and we've both received this remarkable welcome here, and he's been invited to set up and run a very small residence program here at Mountain Cloud, which I think would suit him because he's a deep Zen practitioner and he's a professional psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
That's been his field.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very lucky, you know, all during COVID, we sat together, you know, because we were for the first time in our lives at home together.
Mm-hmm.
Every day we sat. And we've traveled quite a bit for Zen. In fact, that's the only travel, you know, all over the world, but never on vacation.
Yeah, I mean it's part of the occupational hazard of, you know, really devoting your life to Zen. You know, so I'm curious. So you're a lay teacher. You know, when you know, in many Zen traditions, there's, you know, jukai, you take the precepts. You know, priest ordination, you take the precepts. And then depending on your Zen lineage, there's more precepts that you kind of take. So being a lay organization, how does the precepts work its way and structurally, formally into your guys' practice?
I have taken the precepts with Yamada Ryoun Roshi. I have a raksu. I traditionally wear it, you know, during session. If I'm giving a Dharma talk, I might, we're a little more loose about that here, but I value having done that. The understanding with Ryoun Roshi is not, in taking the precepts, is not that you're, you know, signing on to be a Buddhist, which is the traditional understanding, but really taking this way of life to heart, this path, these precepts. And it was a beautiful thing. I did it the very first time he offered it. And he periodically will offer it again during these Kenshukai. So, and now with these four new full Roshi, you know, Henry will be able to offer precepts. So gradually, I think Sanbo Zen, he and his Dharma brothers will be able to do this, so it won't be so limited by circumstance that you have to be a Kenshukai to get your raksu. You know, but then we also take them up as koans at the end.
When you're doing jukai, are you looking more at the absolute perspective of the precepts, or is there any talk of the relative or practical aspects of the precepts?
Yeah, it's this path. It's a way of life. You know, it's as the Roshi says, you know, you have this clarity, this way, and then to make your steps follow it. You know, and he's beautifully saying all the time that he continues to work at that. So it's absolutely how we live in the world. And these are guidelines for that. Very helpful. At the same time, the clearer one gets in practice, the more they become simply an expression of who you are, what this world is, just a natural expression. So I think in the beginning, yes, they function as guidelines, and maybe all along the way, but there's a turn in that where they just comes up. How else would you live?
Yeah, for me, I didn't really expect it to work this way, but they also are kind of a lens where I'm able to kind of see my behavior a little clearer. Like until I took the precepts, I didn't realize how much I lied. Just little lies. You know, I'm not a big liar, but you know how many lies I would do every day. You know, you're like, oh, I was just about to get to that. You know, or, you know what I mean? Like, or I'm leaving right now, or you know.
Yeah, I hear you, and it's really helpful.
After taking the precepts, I just couldn't lie anymore. It was really weird. You know, even to my detriment. You know, and but it makes me, you know, I'm not going to be able to lie about this, so I can't. So I have, you know, I have to live my life in a way that I'm not forced to lie. You know what I mean? Like I didn't expect that at all.
That's a powerful expression of it. really just that.
Mhm. Yeah, and of course, all the precepts. I think that's applicable too. The last one is still, I'm not sure I fully get the don't disparage the Dharma, the Sangha. Like that. That's the one I'm not sure I've ever fully um, come to grips with.
Yeah, I'm not calling them up right now, but there's some lovely variations on the translation that it's just like taking that jewel and turning it
Mhm,
in this, be true to this Buddha, Dharma, Sangha.
mhm,
And I think in our hearts, we, like you with lying, there's a sense where if there's any disparagement. On the other hand, it's impossible to disparage it. you know, Even disparagement is it. And you can't cut it, you can't mar it, it can't be defiled. That's the absolute sense.
mhm,
And but when you see that, then to hold it together, you want to be true to this.
mhm. And then there's the whole thing. Zen has a very colorful history of certain Zen traditions, very vehemently telling other Zen traditions that they're doing it wrong and wasting their time. It's like, is that disparagement? I mean, is that healthy? Because it seems like everyone becomes very passionate. Whatever worked for them, they think it's often think it's like that's the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a standard and we're human.
Mhm.
So it's in that relative way, we're never gonna absolutely perfectly embody it. But there it is. It's this very helpful guide and measure. And as you say, it just raises a question.
Mhm. Yeah. So, so I covered all the things I kind of wanted to touch upon. Is there anything you'd like to explore? I have no ending time here.
Oh, I've enjoyed the conversation. It was not exactly I don't know what I expected, but I, f- I just, what a wonder to be in this world. And, I would say, especially in our time, although I'm sure it's not special to have this war in Ukraine and the climate crisis, this planet, and uh, this just extreme political divisions
Hmm.
in our world, and how we're, we're really, you know, I talk a lot about this one boundless heart, your own true face, wherever you turn, that's it. And sometimes people say, well, isn't that evading or dismissive? No, it really doesn't exclude anything. And, um, I always, so we're called to, do what's ours to do, at the same time to see that it's this world that is profoundly okay.
Hmm.
This peace that Eka sought. My mind is not at rest. I beg you, give it rest. There's
This is Meister Eckhart.
that was Eka, Wicca. It's
Oh,
interesting. Meister Eckhart has similar language. Talk about
oh,
a
Eckhart. Yeah.
yeah, Eka. Just because I mentioned him earlier
Hmm.
with this, I'm not in relation to anything. All relations have come to an end for me, he says. It was profound. He's gone, everything's collapsed. And yet there's this one entirety. And does that mean he's not in relation to Ukraine or the planet or the elections? Of course, there's no relation. It's this one.
Hmm.
And yet we have to really, that inspires me to live in this world
Hmm.
as clearly and helpfully as I can.
Great. If someone wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way to reach you?
Please feel free, you can email me at
Mhm.
v.forstman@tcu.edu.
Okay, great. And can they, if they go through the Mountain
Yeah, Mountain
website?
Cloud website has a link to Johanna Sindelar, who's our fabulous administrator. And that would be the traditional way if somebody who I don't know is reaching out, would like to, I welcome that, but would be to go to the Mountain Cloud website and ask Johanna, and she'll give the contact information and give me a little heads up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barry. All the best.